Before we get started, I wanted to tell you about On the Continent's latest YouTube video. Andy recently went to Istanbul with Lars Sivertsen for the ultimate European football adventure. They spent a week watching Galatasaray, Besiktas and Fenerbahce, and they even spoke to the new Besiktas manager, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. And by the way, Andy, Nicky wants to know what the highlights were and what you brought back for us. Any baklava? That's what you wanted to know, Nicky.
Definitely. I'm sure Andy has brought us back some baklava. He wouldn't not.
Can I tell you a story about a friend of mine who once brought me back an Edinson Cavani biscuit tin from Napoli. And I thought, this is a great item to receive. It's a wonderful item. Still own it. And I opened it and there was nothing in it. And I was like, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Yeah. And he said, no, it didn't come with any biscuits. and then there's a sticker on the bottom that said, tin with biscuits.
Dear, oh dear.
So look, I'm not even going to lie to you here.
So you can see how Andy and Lars got on over on the Continent YouTube channel. Search On the Continent on YouTube and hit subscribe. You'll get new exclusive content every single week, so don't miss out. Nicky, let's start with, the match that happened last night in the Coppa Italia. Milan, a new look Milan to a certain extent, versus Roma. Oh my goodness. Did that result deserve, did Roma deserve the beating they got 3-1?
I don't know. 3-1 in my head sounds like a more emphatic scoreline than I thought this game was. It was odd to say that because Milan were 2-0 up as well. So they did get in front early and stay in front. Roma were in this game. They hit the crossbar at 1-0. They had a goal disallowed at 3-1 for a very, very narrow offside. They definitely attacked and threatened Milan at times. Milan did start better and got the goal they earned for starting better, so they were always noses in front. But it was a close game. It was an interesting game. It was an enjoyable cup game. But certainly watching Milan over the last week, as you just alluded to, does have a very familiar Premier League feel to it and very familiar English feel to it because Kyle Walker starting at right back, obviously having just joined from Manchester City. Fikayo Tomori, who was already there but didn't leave in January, starting at centre-back, and Tammy Abraham starting up front, and what in Italy is often referred to as la legge dell'ex, the law of the X, sometimes referred to as the immutable law of the X, because Tammy Abraham, of course, well, I was going to say former Roma player. He's only on loan at Milan from Roma, and perhaps sinking Roma's best chance of winning something this year by scoring twice in the quarterfinal against them. So the English players very much to the fore in this game. 3 good performances, and also a great impact from newly arrived from England, Joao Felix, who came off the bench and scored as well.
I wonder if you could just explain how Tammy Abrahams could score against his, parent club when he is on loan.
Yeah, there's just no rules against it in Italy. Like in England, obviously, that wouldn't be allowed to play against your parent club in that same way. But there's not a rule against it. So he's allowed to do it, and I don't know. It wasn't that it was necessarily a particularly bitter decision with him leaving in the summer. He missed almost an entire year through injury. When he came back, he wasn't at his sharpest for Roma, so it felt at the time like a good opportunity for everyone, and Roma were trying to move in a different direction in the summer under Daniele De Rossi and the new sporting director Ghisolfi. Now, whether or not there was any coherence that whatsoever is, with hindsight, very questionable, because clearly De Rossi lasted a month and players signed by Ghisolfi like Enzo Lefebvre have already left, and the whole thing was a bit of a chaos. But at the time it seemed like, okay, give this player a fresh start somewhere, create some room under the squad and in the salary to do other things. So it didn't feel like a particularly bitter departure at the time. But yes, certainly Roma fans looking at this player who was there scoring against them in a cup quarterfinal are going to feel a bit frustrated by it.
Yeah, and they made that pretty clear. Even though he didn't celebrate, they accused him of celebrating, which, I think was funny. But I think overall, if you look at the transfer, everyone's got to be happy with it, because it was a sort of make do and mend. They were obviously planning to sell Abraham for quite a bit longer before they got to the point where they actually did let him go, Roma, and his injury just arrived at the wrong time. Really, they were planning to sell him that summer, and whether they could have got a decent chunk of change for him, I think is debatable. It would have been less than the original buyback clause that Chelsea negotiated, which was around £40 million. So, because he'd come off the back of quite a difficult season, even before he got that ACL injury. But I think belatedly, this move has worked quite well for both Milan and Roma, because Abraham has started to really hit his straps, and I think you really saw the value of him. Like the goals were nice last night, but you talked about, Nicky, about the first time the three English players started the game together. Tomori, of course, his reward for refusing to go to Tottenham was to start the Milan derby. He was great in that. Kyle Walker, who was making his debut in that game at the weekend. He had a really good game as well, although arguably he lost Zawewski, who's just gone from Roma to Inter for the equaliser. But you really saw the value of Abraham in that game, because in a game where Inter had loads of the ball, created loads of the chances, they had 3 goals disallowed, they hit the woodwork 3 times. Abraham's ability to hold it up and just make it a bit more difficult for their defenders. He was the first line of defence, and kind of they defended hanging on by their fingernails sometime against Inter. But still, they really dug in, and it was a really good derby performance, I felt, and it showed the value of Abraham. So it feels like they're increasingly happy with him.
After a start that was Abraham actually, he was the one who stole the ball leading up to Milan's goal.
Yes.
Which I think got a bit lost in the highlight because it's a longer highlight, but it's one of those things that actually because there was lovely football that happened afterwards, but none of that happens without Abraham pinching it off Çalhanoğlu in midfield in the first place. So his press was good. And
he's fit enough to press now as well, because he's playing the games, I think is the important thing. But on the other side of that, again, after quite a slow start, mainly because of injury, Roma are really happy with Alexis Salamakers, who was only a squad player at Milan, but he's been great for Roma. So do you see them sort of really working that out? Because the desire, I think, on both sides is to keep those players. But going back to this game last night, I think because that you have this new look, it's not exactly Van Basten, Rijkaard, Gullit, but on the other hand, there is a sense that Milan feel a little bit fresh now. And that's why I think, as Nicky says, we can jump to this conclusion that, wow, this is a resounding result. Wow, they're in the Coppa Italia semi-finals. And you can feel that it was just important to, I guess, at least have that facade that something big has changed. And, you think of the other key points of the game. When the game got iced was when Santi Jimenez, one of the other new signings, sets up another new signing, Joao Felix, and it's a brilliant goal. It's really, really well crafted. And all of a sudden, there's this flush of optimism, and it lifts a bit of this pressure off Conceição, which has sort of been increasing, hasn't it? Certainly, if we go back to the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, one more layer to just the good transfer comment as well. Of course, Abraham going out is partly about clearing the decks for Artem Dovbyk, who scored in this game and has been a good signing for Roma. He's been good. So that is a transfer that I think makes a lot of sense for everyone, even if it doesn't feel like it for Roma last night. The Milan moment is a fascinating one, because I'm still not sure that I'm sold it's all working quite right, and that's kind of part of why I wanted to mention the fact that this was not all one-way traffic, even though the scoreline looks reasonably confident. Milan definitely not a perfect team. The game against Inter, yes, there was some really good stuff in there, and look, Inter are a better team than Milan, so for Milan to get that draw is a good result. The fact that they were leading until the 93rd minute is a positive.
Yeah, the table doesn't lie, does it? And Milan are off the pace in terms of the league.
But what's fascinating is that this is no half-hearted transfer window. This is a transfer window that says we need to get back into the Champions League and we need to do it this season, because they haven't gone shy. They've brought in, as Andy was saying, not just Felix, but also Santi Jimenez, who set up the goal. So immediate positive reward there for those two players coming in.
And who cost a lot of money by their current means as well.
Yeah, Kyle Walker, obviously not an upfront fee, but paying wages as part of the loan. That's going to cost them money. They have put their chips into the middle on we need to get back up the table and get into you're looking at me as if my poker analogy there just
wow, I was thinking eggs in a basket, chips.
I was just thinking poker chips pushed into the middle. They've made their bet.
Fish and chips.
Sorry. Oh no, they're not sharing the chips.
I'm always thinking food. I'm always thinking food. Can it translate though?
It's a bit early for chips. Is it too early for chips? Maybe another chips.
Maybe not this season, but can the effect of the Premier League signings do you think it will translate into the league as well? Fair enough, they're buying them to get into the Champions League, but will it translate into Serie A also?
Well, it's not just the players they've signed, because Tomori, who we've talked about, was very close to joining Tottenham. In fact, the joke going around on Milan's social media is that all it took to get Tomori back to his best was to threaten him with a move to Tottenham. Curiously,
funny, was it?
Curiously, Pavlovic also was linked with moves away, and both of them are suddenly playing their best football, which it's 2 games, so it's a little bit soon to draw that conclusion. But my goodness, if Tomori finally did find his way back to his best, and being more realistic about that, if he did, I would say it's probably more to do with Conceição than it is to do with just the threat of a transfer. But maybe it is also to do with having Kyle Walker alongside you and having some shared connection in terms of not just a literal language, because Tomori speaks Italian well now, and he's done really well on that, but the footballing language that you speak together, and the shared understanding of how football is from playing in the Premier League and growing up in that English culture of football. If that has some value and helps him improve, who knows, that maybe that is something that is real. Because Tomori is fascinating, because sometimes I hear people now saying, oh, it's outrageous that he's not in the England squad and stuff. And I think to myself, well, it was a few years ago, but honestly, lately it hasn't been. He hasn't been good for a while, Tomori. Maybe that's too harsh, but he certainly hasn't been at the levels he was in the title season for a while. And he's had injuries, and Milan's defence has had endless injuries. So there's been a lot of change, and obviously there's been managerial change this season as well. So there's a lot to that. But if he starts playing like he can, and Pavlovic starts playing like the centre-back that he was meant to be when they signed him, and Kyle Walker has a positive impact, that changes a lot, because then you have a defensive platform that can do things. The attack looks pretty tooled up to me when you look at the options they have. Pulisic was already doing well. Reinders was already having a good season in midfield and breaking forward to join the attack. If Felix can carry on like this, if Santi Jimenez can have that sort of impact, you've already got Alex Jimenez, who's had a positive impact going forward sometimes from fullback. There's lots of players there who can do things, and Kyle Walker probably has more of an attacking impetus than... Well, has he got more attacking impetus than Emerson Royal? I don't know. He's just a better footballer than Emerson Royal, so that's a positive as well. The whole team looks better. The thing to say is, to actually answer your question, which I've been very roundabout in getting to, we know that Italy has 4 Champions League spots, right? Napoli, Inter, Atalanta, that's 3 of them. Okay, so maybe you get the 5th spot and it opens up a bit more possibilities, but I'm crossing 3 of your Champions League spots off the board already. And then for the remaining 1 or 2 spots, Lazio have been better than Milan all season. So yes, they've had a bit of a wobble recently, but I still expect them to be in the conversation and to be part of that difficult battle to get in. Then you've also got, competing for these last spots, Juventus, who have had a very odd season with a lot of draws, but they're still ahead of Milan for now. You've got Roma, who absolutely view the Champions League as a must. And you've got teams like Fiorentina, who maybe aren't expected to be in there, but again, a team that has just played better than Milan for a lot of this season. So it's not a given. I
mean, this is Serie A and the European places, though, in recent seasons, though, isn't it? There's just so much traffic to get through that if you have a month of bad form, you're putting yourself at an enormous disadvantage. And, you know, they've had a very patchy season so far domestically. I mean, it's funny because them turning up in the big games, it doesn't really tell us anything, does it? Because the problem has been the consistency with them throughout this season. And that's why we're right to view this game, I think, Dotun, for example, with a bit of caution. Because a big occasion game, for them to turn up and for them to win the game, and remember, they've got 4 points off Inter in the league this season, which is pretty extraordinary. They've won at the Bernabeu against Real Madrid. None of those things, beating Inter or winning at Real Madrid, could save Paulo Fonseca. And I think what's really interesting when you look at how they've gone, as you say, Nicky, all in on. This is what I wanted to ask you really in this transfer window. Is it feels to me that it's not just about trying like a Hail Mary for the Champions League, although that is important to them. The fact is, there's a sense maybe, and there's been a sense in the opening weeks of Conceição that he's got a lot of the same problems as Fonseca, even though he's a very, very different type of coach and personality. So is there something intrinsically wrong with the culture? And when we're talking about the English core, for example, are we talking about shifting the epicenter of the team? Because one of the biggest problems for them this season, and we haven't even mentioned either of them, is Theo Hernandez and Rafael Leao. So is there a sense of, we can't rely on these guys, we have to change the attitudes and the culture within the squad?
I didn't even notice myself doing it, Andy, but as you were talking to me, I was thinking to myself, how did I talk about Milan having these good attacking options, and Leao didn't even come out of my mouth, didn't even say it, or Theo. And you're right, you're dead right. That is a huge part of the conversation. The inconsistency is a huge part of the conversation, because one of the first things we heard from Conceição was right after he shows up and wins the Supercopa, the best possible start, beating Juventus and Inter in the Supercopa. He said, okay, but we have to go and beat Cagliari next in the league. And they didn't. They drew with Cagliari. So they absolutely are that team still who aren't on a stable footing. I thought Theo was good against Inter at the weekend, and I thought he was solid again in the cup. The question of Leao feels more unresolved to me. I think Theo, the noises he's made in the performances look a bit more like he's ready to buck his ideas up. Although I say that, he had a bad game against Parma, didn't he? So I don't know. He's at least been making the right noises publicly about buying in. I
think the thing is, though, because, and it's slightly unfair, but because they're compatriots, it feels as if, and the way that Conceição presented himself at the beginning is, I'm going to fix Rafael Leao. And so it feels as if after every game he's being asked quite a lot about Rafael Leao's performance, and he's like, well, I need to see more from him off the ball. And he's not the sort of guy who avoids confrontation, Conceição. So this sense of, is he dragging the very best out of him? And he kind of made a rod for his own back at the start when he said, this guy can be one of the best players in the world if he does what I say.
Yeah, and so far what we've seen of Leao is, under Conceição, is very similar to what we saw before, which is a couple of great games. He scored the goal against Girona, didn't he, in the Champions League, and won that game for them. But several where he's been anonymous. We haven't really seen him, and I think that is, for having watched Leao as much as I have over the last few seasons, it just remains a hugely frustrating puzzle, because I've absolutely been someone who's defended him and stuck up for how good of a footballer he is, because when he's on, he's brilliant, but he is not on. It feels like lately he's not on quite a lot.